Okay, you should be good.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. In the absence of Chair Walker, I'll be presiding over this meeting. I am Dawn Offit, the Executive Director of Initiatives for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Council. And I'm going to call this meeting to order at 1:02 p.m. Jessica, if you would you call the roll for us, please?
Yes. Whitney Allen. Colby Burks.
Here.
Rochelle Brown.
Present.
David Carpenter. Robert Croft. Kelly Ellis. Love Tisha Robertson.
Present.
Terrence Sullivan. Elaine Walker. Okay, Dr. Offit, we do not have a quorum presently.
Okay, thank you. So let me remind you, this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube for the general public. All audio and video is being captured and recorded. And in order to participate in this meeting, your video must be turned on. When you are not the active speaker, please ensure your microphone is muted so there isn't any background noise. If you do need to speak, please raise your hand so I can call on you before I unmute you or you unmute yourselves. Are there any questions? Hearing none, then we will go ahead with the meeting agenda. At this time, we'll have a welcome and CPE board updates from Dr. Aaron Thompson, President of the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. Dr. Thompson.
Thank you, Dr. Offit. Good afternoon, committee. It's good to see everybody. It's my pleasure to be here with you. You know, it feels almost like it's summertime. I have to tell you that after this season, winter season, and the season of the legislature, I mean, it's nice to have a little bit of free time that I haven't yet realized, but I know it's coming. But it's also nice to get the warm weather. So thank you all for being here. I know we don't have a quorum, but I do want to bring you up to date on some things. Some folks have heard some of this already. Colby, I know you have. But I want to start out by saying that, you know, for higher education, this has been a really good year when it comes to not only the outcomes and successes that we've had. Just found out from the latest data that we're 7th in the country in increasing completion in this in Kentucky. That's good news. I mean, that's been something that we've obviously been trying to do. I'm also happy to say that we've put forth a lot of efforts to make sure that not only students are completing, but students of color and low-income students are completing, as the charge you all are here with us. The other piece I will tell you, and I'm happy to say this, is that, you know, all of our campuses are on board with this paradigm, on board with this value proposition. And as we brought out our new strategic agenda that you've heard about, equity is at the center of that agenda. And no matter what we talk about, how we talk about it, whether it's building the talent for the state or building the affordability matrix that would allow all students to not only enter our universities and colleges, but also complete it, we're proud to say that all of those pieces together has really shown a difference in our gap closing numbers. The last few years have shown us that overall we've increased about 10% and overall for completion and about 37% for our students of color. So it's working. Long way to go though. But the legislature and the governor's office realized our hard work and in fact invested in us. So the argument I've made the 14 times that I testified this year was a very simple argument. For us to have a strong, sustainable economy, we had to have a strong, educated workforce. In order for us to have that, we had to have a strong higher education system. So invest in us. This wasn't about that we've been cut for 12 years. This is about investing in a 67% of return on investment. And so that argument was heard. And so we had the best budget we've had in decades. And that really pleases me. But we also got some incentive monies to help in our healthcare pipeline and a variety of our other workforce areas in addition. As you also know, that KSU had ran into some deep financial problems and some other issues that the Council on Post-Secondary Education last July was charged with working on and addressing. Travis Powell with Greg Rush and a lot of other folk that are part of my staff worked really hard along with myself to make sure that we had our ducks in a row to make the argument to the legislature that please give us these $23 million that makes Kentucky whole, but in addition, give us the extra money that's going to make Kentucky thrive. We're happy to say that they did exactly that. Now the hard work begins. And I will tell you, Travis has been charged with being our executive liaison to KSU's campus, along with a team of folk that he'd be working with, like Greg Rush, to make that take place. I obviously will be deeply involved. I'm sure Travis will give you in this update, we'll be swearing in a new board for KSU this Wednesday. So overall, news is good, but we don't have this philosophy at CPE or in higher education as a whole that successes remain successes if we don't do anything else. Successes only get us the opportunity to be on a new baseline to get more successes. So as we look at the work you all are doing, as what we've asked you decades ago for you to do, is really consider how we create a new baseline of success around those that have historically been disenfranchised. I know today you'll hear some reports from our staff that's going to give you some data on what's happening with the planning and the evaluation of those plans. My hope is that we have campuses like I know we've had one or two say, no, it's not good enough that we're not doing what we need to do. We want to do better. And how can you help us to do better? And that's what this new plan was about. That's no longer a new plan, that we have our new policy that we have at CPE. It is about creating a culturally competent campus. It is about creating an environment that everybody wants to come to so they can be successful when they get there and feel belonged on that campus. So as I end I'm going to end it here in a second, let you ask me any questions, but as I end this, I will tell you, I get the privilege of speaking around the country and around the state a lot. The thing that I am not shy about is to say that for us to have success, we can't leave people behind. For us to have success, this can't be a way we do it haphazardly. It has to be strategic, has to be purposeful, has to be designed, has to be evaluated, and has to be continually improved. And so our goals are to continue to do that. So I want to thank you for your work. And Dawn, I want to thank you and your staff for your work. And once again, I would be remiss if I didn't say that a lot of the successes we've had in the state doesn't happen without the campuses doing what they need to do where the rubber meets the road. But I have to tell you, none of the successes that I have or we have here in Kentucky doesn't happen without a hell of a staff, and I got one of them. And I want to thank them for their work. And many of them are on here, so I appreciate you. And with that, I will take any questions that you may have for me.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Does anyone have any questions for him?
Well, you're a quiet audience. Normally I don't, normally I just instigate, but it sounds like I informed okay this time. So good to see everybody. If there's any questions, I'll be on here for a few minutes and then you can ask me directly. But until then, Dawn, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. At this point, slated on the agenda, we have the approval of our minutes. Jessica, do we have a quorum yet?
Yes, ma'am, we have a quorum now.
Thank you. So CEO members, if you would look in your meeting materials, you should have a copy of the minutes from our last meeting in January. And if there are no additions or corrections to the minutes, I would like to call for a motion for the minutes to be approved.
So moved.
Motion to approve.
A second.
So it has been properly moved by Mr. Burks and seconded by Mr. Croft. All in favor? Either say aye or raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Thank you very much. At this time, we are going to have an overview of our diversity evaluation report scoring process by Mr. Travis Powell. Travis, are you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, sorry everybody, my computer, Zoom just crashed on my computer, so I'm now on my phone.
Just let me know when you need to advance the slide.
I will do it. Okay. Again, first off, I missed again, because since it crashed, I missed the end of Dr. Thompson's comments. So if I've missed anything, if I'm repeating anything, I apologize, but just want to take this opportunity before we go over the scoring process to send a huge thanks out to our review teams. This is not an easy process. This is a very in-depth process, and that's where some of the the richness of the program comes from, is from your all's review and your comments that you all make. And everybody takes this super, super seriously. And when that happens, and there's a lot of material to go through, and it takes up a lot of time. But each year, our review teams continue to improve and do a better job and really give good feedback to our teams. Our reports get better every year too. We've always promoted this as a continuous improvement model, and I think that happens all the way around. So anyway, I just want to take this opportunity to thank all the review team members, both on CP staff as well as our CEO members who are volunteering their time, not only for these meetings, but for the reviews. It just makes such a huge difference on our campuses and really makes this process what it is. I mean, the scores are what they are, and they certainly move toward those numeric goals that we set forth for our campuses. But the richness is really for this review process, in my opinion. So thank you so much for your time. It would not be what it is without you guys. So let's go to the first slide, or the first substantive slide. Okay, well, this is, again, we're about to receive our report out on the 2021 annual report. A qualitative report was submitted by all the campuses, and the data from 2020, 2021 was analyzed and evaluated based on the criteria. We, just to give you a broad overview, it's evaluated again on the rubric and divided into two sections, both one quantitative and one qualitative, essentially equally distributed, although KCTCS has two fewer points in the quantitative section, which we'll explain in a second. And then there's a minimum score for eligibility to offer new programs. So a 24 out of a total of 36 for our universities, and a 22 out of a total of 34 for our KCTCS institutions. Next slide, please. There's on the quantitative side of the evaluation, there's progress is evaluated towards targets set in the following areas: undergraduate and graduate enrollment, first and second year retention for both URM and low income. And I'll mention too, quickly, there is no graduate enrollment, obviously, at our KCTCS institutions, and that's where the two less points are accounted for there in their analysis. Again, first and second year retention for both URM and low income students, graduation rates for URM and low income students, degrees conferred and credentials awarded for both URM and low income students, and workforce diversity. And we've had goals set as part of our strategic agenda process. It's actually just ended, and so the 2021 goals, the final goals for the strategic, the outgoing strategic agenda, is calculated in this report. There are 9 areas again for universities and 8 areas for KCTCS institutions for scoring. Institution gets 2 points for an annual target met or exceeded. 1 point if the target's not met, but the value is greater than the 2015-2016 baseline amount, and 0 if the target is not met and they're below the 2015-2016 baseline. There's a maximum of 18 points again for universities and 16 points for KCTCS institutions in the quantitative section. Next slide, please. Just a quick note on enrollment. Diversity, while we look at our underrepresented students or our racial and ethnic diversity on our campuses, and we have goals set in those areas, we also look at other types of diversity as well, and institutions are required to provide a narrative response to other types of diversity, which could be anything really, religious, geographic, all different types of diversity. You know, our definition of diversity is very broad in our diversity, equity, inclusion policy, and want to make sure that we're capturing all types of diversity as best we can in our narrative reports, even though we don't have hard numbers and don't do data collections on some of those items like religion, sexual orientation, that sort of thing. We don't collect numbers on often, but we do know those folks on our campuses. We want to hear about those as well because they play a role into the richness that diversity provides on our campuses. So we require that narrative report along with the data on the racial and ethnic folks as well, underrepresented racial and ethnic folks as well as part of our diversity, our enrollment collections. And those are scored on a pass-fail basis. So if an institution, we don't, in order to avoid any constitutional issues and create any kind of quote quotas for any students, which would be against the constitutional requirements that we have for equal protection, we just do this on a pass-fail basis. And we look at all the elements, both numeric and qualitative, in order to give a pass-fail score. And pass receives a 2 in this area, and 0 is a fail, and we do this in both the graduate and undergraduate level for our 4-year institutions. Next slide, please. We also do a qualitative analysis, which is essentially equal weight, as I've described below earlier. And we look at the 3 focus areas outlined in our policy for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We look at opportunity, success, and impact, which actually align with the prior strategic agenda areas that we had. Each institution has to submit a plan and identify strategies designed to meet the goals set forth in each of these focus areas. For each focus area, the reports are evaluated on the following criteria. So first off, institutions are required to write on each strategy of how they implemented that strategy, and if they did so with fidelity. Did they actually do what they said they were going to do? Did they implement the strategy wholeheartedly with fidelity on their campus? We do an analysis of strategy effectiveness. So, okay, you implemented the strategy. How well did it work? Was it successful? Was it not successful? I mean, the best laid plans, even executed with fidelity, don't always work. And we need to look and see whether or not they are in order to see whether or not we need to continue those programs or give it a little more time to see what's working. Also, institutions can institute pilot initiatives, and analyzing whether or not they work may result in those being implemented more widespread across the campus. Then finally, we'll look at lessons learned and next steps. And sort of along with what I said earlier, if something's working really well, what are the next steps? So we're going to implement this wider on our campus, or it's not working, and this is the 2nd year in a row that we've not gotten the results that we thought we would get out of this strategy. So the next step is we're going to discontinue this and do something different. Really just sort of supports, again, I mentioned earlier, the continuous improvement model. This really supports that model and actually puts it into the policy and makes institutions be really thoughtful about all the strategies that they're implementing. The 3 evaluation areas are scored in the following manner in the 2 to 0 framework that we looked at on the quantitative scores. 2 meets or exceed expectations. 1 is making progress towards meeting those expectations, and a 0 if it does not meet expectations. And our rubric explains a little bit more about what those mean, how that's supposed to be analyzed, but that's the general gist of how those are evaluated. And there again, there's a maximum of 18 points in this area. There's 3 policy areas with each with 3 evaluation areas, and a maximum of 2 points in each category would be a maximum of 18 points. And I'll just remind, next slide, please. I'll just remind you again, and this is sort of the outcome of the analysis, and we'll set up the reports that you all receive. But note too that with the passing scores here that you see, and it's on this slide as well, it should be 22 out of 34 for KCTCS and 24 out of 36 for four-year institutions. If you do well in any one area, even if you're a perfect score on the quantitative or a perfect score on the qualitative piece, that's still not going to pass. So you have to do a little bit of both. Obviously, you can make up a lot of ground if you're not good in any one section, but still, we wanted to make sure that we set a cut score where both sections would have to be fully addressed. We didn't want the numbers to simply tell the story and not have the qualitative piece as well, and vice versa. So it's a holistic approach and takes into account both areas. So anyway, the last part is just the outcome of this. Is that this is a statutorily mandated responsibility that we have to implement, and it requires that institutions that CP postpone the approval of any new academic program if the institution has not met or equal educational opportunity goals by CPE. So that's how we implement this section. And if institutions don't receive the passing score, they're not eligible to offer new programs automatically in the next fiscal year. They would be required to submit a performance improvement plan to this group for review if they haven't made it. We've done that in the past. And I will say, Dawn, in most every year that we've gotten a performance improvement plan, institutions have very much improved the next year. So the process has worked, and we continue to get that continuous improvement that I spoke about earlier. It's baked into this process. Any questions about the process before we start hearing the reports? Not hearing any. Again, I just want to thank everybody so much for all their hard work in this, and look forward to hearing the presentations today.
Thank you for that update and overview of the process. And so at this point, we're going to go ahead and look at the reports for this year. Before we get started, I want to inform you that there is an adjustment on the presentation, not the structure, but who's going to go when. We have number 5. 5 is going to go first, and then we'll go back with 1, 2, 3, 4, and then hit 6. Mr. Croft, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, just briefly, I wanted to thank you, Travis, and the rest of the team. This process this time around was a lot easier for us to do, that, at least from my perspective, having done this before. And just wanted to say thank you for some of the changes in process you made and kind of the materials and how it was put together. And I'm sure the schools had a lot to do with that as well, but it was a lot easier to digest. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We always look to incorporate any feedback, and we want to make sure that we are making it as easy as possible for you all, because we know that it is a heavy lift. So we appreciate that. So at this time, we're going to start with Team 5. And we have Ms. Amanda Johansson, who is our team lead, and she is going to be discussing Owensboro Community and Technical College, Southeast Community and Technical College, Hopkinsville Community College, and Eastern Kentucky University.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Great.
And
thank you, John.
Just make sure that you just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Yes, ma'am. First, I just wanted to say thank you to the committee for accommodating the change in presentation order so that I can participate in additional agency business following this meeting. So thank you. And let's go ahead and look at Owensboro. So just to start with the scores for Owensboro, they had a total of 27 out of 34, and you can see the distribution of their quantitative and qualitative scores here. And then, John, if you want to move on when you're ready. Lots of specific feedback that we had for each institution. I want to deeply thank Drs. Ellis and Brown for participating on my committee. We were a STEM-oriented committee, so had lots of specific feedback to share, but just wanted to include some highlights. For this campus, we were particularly happy that their reports usually included year-over-year data and context in the analysis and assessment of their initiatives, which was really helpful and is a structure that we were excited to see. But some notable areas that we hope that they improve on are that when they specify specific subpopulations in a goal, that their strategies actually specify how they are reaching those specific student subpopulations. Many very specific goals were addressed with strategies that were far-reaching and broad. Not to say they can't affect those subpopulations, but we were looking for a little bit more detail in some of those areas to explain specifically how that was happening. And then also, there were a couple of instances where the strategies included description or context that was not directly related to the stated goal. So seemed like additional narrative, which is always helpful context, but sometimes missing, tying it back to the goal itself. Our final piece of takeaway that I would offer just for this institution is that they had an extremely large number of goals that were both very specific and very broad and overlapped often. So we hope that they think about their scope of goals and how they might more consistently set them in the future, but that's not really related to how we assess them, just an additional piece of feedback. All right, on to Southeast. The total score for Southeast was 20 out of 34, and you can see the distribution between quantitative and qualitative here. The report from Southeast was quite strong. They also included year-over-year data and context in their implementation strategies, which again was really refreshing to see and clear that they had spent a lot of time in their analysis and thinking about specifically how to reflect on the strategies that they included in their report. But we were looking for additional next steps. So they've done a lot of really thoughtful reflection, but not necessarily clarified exactly how they were going to grow, change, adapt initiatives that were included in the report. So looking for more reflection on their growth opportunities. Onward, Dawn, thanks. Hopkinsville Community College, you can see they had a total of 21 out of 34 and the distribution here. Similar to one of the campuses that we visited earlier, this campus had several goals that specified very specific subpopulations in the goals, but they did not include details in the fidelity of implementation work that were specific to all of the subpopulations that they mentioned. So we hope that they take the care to actually list out and itemize how they are serving all of the subpopulations that they are intending to. And their lessons learned and next steps were often not specific to those subpopulations either. Could have been a case of serving lots of the same subpopulations with the same effort, but we needed to see a little bit more context and explanation about exactly how that was all tying together. There was thorough narrative, which was great, but we would like to see more specifics included with their next steps. Occasionally, this team included things in their next steps that were things like identify appropriate next steps for this goal, which was not concrete enough for us, and we were looking for them to spend a little bit more time in this reflection prior to the submission of the report. And last one, I think, for our team, John, thank you, is Eastern Kentucky University, the score of 27 out of 36 with their distribution here. And overall, EKU had a thorough report with, you can see the top two bullet points of just specifics for their team, but similar to Owensboro, but in a different way. Our top piece of feedback for EKU was coming back to the number of goals, EKU set just 4 goals. And it was sort of an observation from our team that they might have additional opportunities that they should consider about how to be more specific and concrete with helping to achieve the aims of diversity on their campus. They're especially in comparison to the other institutions that our team evaluated, probably some more opportunities. So we hope that they think about that in developing their goals in the future. And in the specific response to their goals, we hope that they would include additional data and evidence that was a little bit lacking in their responses.
Does that conclude your institutions?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
Thank you very much for your work and your feedback. At this time, we're going to circle back to Team 1, and we have Dr. Gia Grace Dye, who is the team lead, who's going to be sharing information from the review team on Hazard Community and Technical College, Madisonville Community College, Somerset Community College, and Kentucky State University.
Thank you, Dawn. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. So our team reviewed the diversity reports put together by those 4 institutions. And it's been a great opportunity for me and my team to know more about those 4 institutions and how they are creating a more diverse student body, faculty, and staff for their institutions. And this is actually my 2nd year of reviewing those 4 institutions. I want to thank my team, especially for their efforts, especially Kobe Burks, as well as Dawn and Jessica for helping us walk through the process. So let's start with the first institution, Hazard. So overall, Hazard had a total score of 29 out of 34 points. And my team gave a total qualitative score of 70 out of 18 points. So most of the strategies and initiatives listed in their report were well implemented. Our team thinks highly of several student, faculty, employee-driven programs to support the campus diversity, such as administration of cultural competence, service to all students, employees, professional development trainings related to cultural competence, equity, and inclusion. The Multicultural Leadership Council program at local high schools is a great program to increase students from multi-background to involve with leadership programs. And we think they have very good strategies to recruit URM low-income students to the President Student Ambassadors program. And Hazard showed committed efforts to help students succeed, especially URM students, through the development and implementation of graduation plans for credential-seeking students, as well as a mandatory first-year achieving academic success course. Overall, this institution took intentional steps which led to meaningful results. So for the part of the lessons learned for each strategy, we hope that the institution will provide more information on how they will address those lessons in the future. So the next institution is Madison Community College. And overall, they had a total score of 28 out of 34 points. And my team gave a total qualitative score of 17 out of 18 points. Overall, Madison demonstrates a strong commitment to increase the overall diversity of the campus, such as their professional development training opportunities for faculty and staff to expand their understanding of cultural competence, and the purposeful inclusion of diversity-related activities into extracurricular and curricular experiences of their students. They implemented several initiatives to increase the cultural competence of students, faculty, and staff. A few strategies on increasing the recruitment and enrollment of diversity students have been successfully implemented. What Madison did really well is that they implemented targeted advising interventions to support URM student persistence and retention. Data provided in the document also indicate the effectiveness of those programs. For the part of lessons learned for each strategy, we hope that institution will provide more specific information for next steps. And the next institution is Somerset Community College. So overall, Somerset had a total score of 27 out of 34 points. And my team gave a total qualitative score of 15 out of 18 points. So Somerset put a lot of efforts into recruiting URM students. They have also implemented programs to support URM low-income students to improve their retention and persistence. They take intentional steps to make the campus more engaging for students, especially students from underrepresented groups. However, our team found that some of the narratives regarding the implementation of the strategies didn't really address their actions very clearly. And the data provided to indicate the effectiveness of the strategy was not clearly stated. And some of the lessons written in a very general form, it's hard for us to understand what exactly they've learned and how they're going to address those lessons in the future. So the last institution that we reviewed is Kentucky State University. And the overall KSU had a total score of 28 out of 36. My team gave a total qualitative score of 15 out of 18 points. So KSU did a good job demonstrating its commitment to its diversity policies and initiatives, but there are some shortfalls in this regard. So first, there's no document regarding specific plans on how to recover from the pandemic. And second, little information was provided on how the initiatives were to be implemented. So most of the evidence provided in this document was qualitative, failing to provide some of the quantitative evidence to indicate the effectiveness of their programs. So, and KSU did really well actually identifying the shortcomings of their initiatives and creating a very comprehensive strategy for addressing those shortcomings in the futures. So that's the end of this brief summary from my team, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much for the work that you and your team did. Next, we're going to go to team 2, and that was led by Ms. Javonda Keith. And those institutions that team reviewed were Ashland Community and Technical College, Henderson Community College, Northern Kentucky University, and South Central Community and Technical College.
Thank you, Dr. Offit, and thanks for the opportunity to learn about this process and these particular institutions as we grow to improve our state and grow together to improve our state in this area. And thanks also to my team members, Dr. Levtisha Robertson and Ms. Tammy Blevins, who contributed great thought and energy into this initiative. Next slide, please. Here are the scores for Ashland Community and Technical College, ACTC. Overall, the college scored 26 out of 34 points. ACTC's dedication to support underrepresented minority students, URMs, close the achievement gaps for URMs, and foster culturally diverse campuses is evident throughout its diversity plan. The college's commitment to enhance relationships and improve ways to assist the URM population is demonstrated through work performed in the newly created position of Senior Fellow of Cultural Diversity and in development of the case management approach used by the Director of Cultural Diversity. The CEO would like to highlight the following recommendations. The collection, analysis, and intentioned use of data could better aid in validating the effectiveness of future strategies and informing decisions based on lessons learned. For example, additional information is needed under all three areas to justify strategy implementation. Under implementation of strategies with fidelity, on page 14 of the college's report, the report states, although an abundance of information was sent out to URM students, only 2 students completed the necessary information during this time to obtain a minority scholarship. The CEO would like to recommend that ACTC provide additional information regarding what type of information was sent, how often the information was sent, and how many students received the information. In addition, it is referenced that several offices send communications to students. Is there a communications plan in place to make sure departments are not duplicating efforts? If yes, how does the communications plan support this strategy, and how will it improve response times and inquiries from students? And please note that additional recommendations were provided for each strategy. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Henderson Community College. Here are the scores for HCC. Overall, the college scored 19 out of 34 points. Score rationale. Henderson Community College's value of diversity was demonstrated throughout its diversity plan through a report of intentional strategies designed to increase campus diversity. Information presented reflected generous thought and effort and provided evidence of a comprehensive approach to students' needs both inside and outside of the academic realm, with a clear commitment to students' overall well-being. Information presented also reflected admirable efforts around organizational structure and services alignment, addressing students as well as staff with concrete examples of roles, responsibilities, and resources designed to promote the intended culture of high expectations. However, it was challenging for the CEO to review the 2021 DEI report submission for HCC under established Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education DEI calibration team scoring processes due to deficiencies in format, structure, and content. The CEO scored as it did based on the following. Format. The college's report incorporated the use of a tactics format that was not organized in a clear, effective manner. In addition, these tactics seem to override and in some cases disregard the strategies in question. This formatting choice prevented the full appropriate assessment of the college's implementation of strategies with fidelity, the effectiveness of those strategies, and lessons learned. The college's report employed the use of a numbering system that was neither familiar to the CEO nor logical or consistent in its approach. The structure of the evidence provided for individual strategies varied throughout the report and reflected a general overall misalignment of information, thus raising questions for the CEO around the oversight of report completion. Ultimately, the current report structure and its associated complications are unfortunate as they translate into a misrepresentation of what the CEO is certain was the valuable time and effort of many HCC faculty and staff. Content. The college's report contained pieces of valuable information throughout the document, but the location of this content was scattered, fragmented, and disorganized. The report prevented critical opportunities for the CEO to gain a comprehensive understanding and appreciation of the college's efforts in the areas of DEI. The report also reflected a tendency or intention to rely on subjective information when measuring effectiveness. Overall, the diversity plan was incohesive and lacked clarity and consistency. During review, it was very difficult to align each strategy with the justification provided for effectiveness and lessons learned. In light, the information provided for the two success strategies represented the stronger elements of the college's report. The CEO would like to suggest that future plans be written in a manner that employs a similar approach to generate the appropriate recognition and full appreciation of HCC's efforts in all strategy areas. Specifically, in future plans, the CEO highly recommends that the college remove the tactics under each strategy and use narrative only, work closely with its institutional effectiveness department, that is, develop a viable survey tracking assessment to track URM student participation and provide more URM data throughout the plan, make sure the lessons learned are aligned with the effectiveness of each strategy, and reconsider its approach to data collection, reporting, and analysis by identifying objective tools, processes, and mechanisms that can be implemented to inform and strengthen its ability to function as a high-performing, data-driven institution. Please note that additional recommendations were provided for each strategy. If we can move to Northern Kentucky University, please. Thank you. Here are the scores for Northern Kentucky University in KU. Overall, the university scored 28 out of 36 points. Special note, to eliminate bias, as a committee, we decided to eliminate one reviewer from the NKU review, since this reviewer is a Northern Kentucky community member interfacing with the university in several professional capacities. Score rationale. NKU's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is thoroughly exemplified throughout its diversity plan. The university has done a great job implementing the CEO's previous recommendations. The university's commitment to continue to serve as a steward of place and the foundational education leader in Northern Kentucky is evident through its partnerships, principles, and practices of inclusive excellence in URM programming. The university did a great job ensuring the implementation of its strategies with fidelity. Through surveys, ongoing assessments, and data to validate the effectiveness of its strategies, the university was able to take ownership of the issues and identify gaps in its programming models, strengthen partnerships, and identify additional avenues of support for URM students, faculty, and staff. The CEO would like to commend Northern Kentucky University on a job well done this reporting period and highly encourages the university to continue its great work to expand, modify, and increase URM programming and support systems. And if we can move to the next institution, thank you. Here are the scores for South Central Kentucky Community and Technical College, SKY-CTC. Overall, the college scored 27 out of 34 points. Score rationale. SKY-CTC's value of the diversity of its people is demonstrated throughout its diversity plan. The college's commitment to broaden the perspectives and worldviews of its students is evident through its partnerships and collaborations with local communities. The college did a great job ensuring the implementation of its strategies with fidelity. The CEO would like to highlight the following recommendations. Strategic collection of data and use of collected data for each URM group could better aid in validating the effectiveness of future strategies and informing decisions based on lessons learned. For example, it is recommended that SKY-CTC identify student programming, classes, and/or community events where it could provide diversity training. That is, invite Dr. Cleveland as a guest speaker to a trio event, host a diversity training with Dr. Cleveland through the FYE course, create diversity activities, HIPs, that instructors could use in general education elective courses. Some of these activities could include group projects, exit tickets, think, pair, share, in-class group work using whiteboards, 1-minute writings, etc. Please note that additional recommendations were provided for each strategy. And this concludes my review team's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Keith, and you and your review team. At this point, we're going to go to our next group, which is Team 3, led by Dr. Stephanie Mayberry. And this includes West Kentucky Community and Technical College, the University of Louisville, Mays Community and Technical College, and Western Kentucky University. Dr. Mayberry.
Good afternoon. Our team went through this process, and some of us were new to the process, but we were overall impressed with the reports and the thoroughness of the reports. What we tried to provide feedback to was just ways to improve. It's always a continuous improvement cycle, as Travis Powell mentioned earlier, and so we want to make sure that we were given that type of feedback. So I'll start and go through each institution. West Kentucky Community and Technical College scored a 29 out of 34 for both the quantitative and qualitative scores. In much of what was written in the narrative portion was a lot about the impact of the pandemic. And so, our team would like for West Kentucky to show some other innovative efforts to engage small business, and more specificity is needed for the utilization of the Mackenzie Scott gift. And And although the responses speak to the appreciative in success, although the responses speak to the appreciative of advising approach supporting the most vulnerable students, it doesn't speak directly to URM students, and we wanted to see more of that specifically for the DEI plan. The overall support will improve all student success somewhat, but centering equity is critical for this work. With impact, our team suggested the integration of LibGuides to be more robust and intentional, with integration in the FYE courses, increased student awareness, and greater engagement among faculty and staff. Next slide, please. The University of Louisville scored a 28 out of 36 between the quantitative and qualitative scores. The lessons learned in Opportunity were very broad and not specific to the strategies to improve increasing the enrollment of URM students, and what we would like to see in future reports are ways to be proactive rather than reactive. And I think that what we saw in some of the narrative was an anticipation of increase and not being proactive about the increases. And so we want to see that in the future reports. In success, the responses should include an analysis of what has happened in ways that you can move beyond obstacles rather than just a recapping of the data. And in impact, incomplete data related to training, number of participants in comparison to the total population versus just letting us know how many people participated. And then next steps, what other training is available when you don't reach the numbers that you want or you desire to. Next slide. Maysville Community and Technical College scored a 28 out of 34 between the quantitative and qualitative scores. Within Opportunity, it was a debate among the team about a recommendation of changing the language about matriculation of dual credit students, or the number of URM students participating in dual credit and eventually ending up at Maysville Community and Technical College. And so that feedback is available for the institution to decide how they would wish to apply it. Under success, we suggested incorporating the details of the next step for the upcoming performance cycle. And I know that that's a slightly an adjustment because, as Travis mentioned earlier, we are going to be changing those plans a little bit for the next strategic agenda. Impact, we would like to see more open-end responses to the survey to gauge learning. We want to see how faculty and staff are going to take what they've learned and apply it across the institution, clearly addressing the implementation improvement cycle and the lessons learned we feel is going to be critical for Maysville. Next slide. And Western Kentucky University, this is our final institution that we reviewed. They scored a 30 out of 36 between the qualitative and quantitative scores. Next slide. And overall, we felt that the report was well written and supported by the data. The review team looks forward to learning about the ways in which WKU plans to address issues uncovered by the Campus Climate Survey. We do feel like that work is going to be very critical because we saw some results of the survey that ran the gamut of experiences. So the institution will have to be very intentional, very specific about ways to address those issues on their campus. Overall, again, as I said earlier, this was, we really enjoyed the feedback that we received from the institutions in the narrative, and we feel like they're continuing to do great work at the institutional level.
Thank you, Dr. Mayberry, for taking the lead on this, and thank you for the work that you and your team did. At this point, we're going to move to our Group 4, which is led by Ms. Kathy Garrett, and that includes Big Sandy Community and Technical College, Morehead State University, Jefferson Community and Technical College, and Bluegrass Community and Technical College.
Hello, everyone. I just want to thank my team members, Elaine Walker and Lisa Shimwell, for their work. I feel like we had a good group of reports. First one is Big Sandy, and they had an overall score of 27 out of 34, and our team gave them a 16 out of 18 on the qualitative. The review team saw positive efforts in this report to support their strategies through differing methods. They used collaborative efforts, supported students with service to meet personal needs, and sought out URM and low-income students to provide resources to support student success. They had efforts in mentoring and offering mental health assistance and working with their ready-to-work students. We would have liked to see more and differing efforts in advertising and seeking out their URM candidates for faculty and staff positions. We also appreciated that they were offering scholarships for African American and Hispanic students. Unfortunately, they found that they didn't have funds to fund that Hispanic student scholarships. We would have liked to have heard more about the development of those fundraising efforts and had some additional detail for that. Overall, the lessons learned showed good reflection and areas of improvement. Many of the strategies would have been better supported with greater student feedback and detail on how the institution plans to proceed in the future. Adding specifics as to how the institution plans to implement the lessons learned would be a benefit to the review as well as planning for upcoming strategies. We felt like they did a nice job at identifying their URM and their at-risk students. Those students were identified, flagged. If the student was struggling, they offered intrusive advising as far as follow-up. And they made a good effort to support students struggling through the pandemic as well as meeting personal needs. Next slide, please. Morehead State University had an overall score of 24 out of 36, and for the qualitative, we gave them a 16 out of 18. One of the strategies that we thought showed a high level of commitment from leadership, faculty, and staff was they incorporated diversity training from the top down. They started with the president's cabinet and took the training to faculty and staff, and then developed DEI teams who were then charged with going out into the campus community to train and support. And this seemed to be a very effective strategy that they can continue to grow on. We would have liked to have more data on the effectiveness of their mentoring program, but thought it was a good strategy to use intrusive advising. They were offering mentoring for Black males, group mentoring, one-on-one alumni connections, and high-profile mentoring. One of the areas that they were working on was the recruitment of diverse faculty and explored different ways of gaining faculty, such as retention. And we thought when you're exploring options to increase your diverse faculty, the questions we would ask is, are you confirming that committees and staff are of a diverse group, and was training implemented for all those involved? It's good to see the effort to seek out students who have left the institution. The review team would have liked to see more detail on how you plan to develop pathways to completion for re-enrolled students, as well as additional evaluation as to why this effort was not more successful. The report showed well laid out plans and reflection about the needs for collaboration, for their diversity efforts, for cohesive plans, and to move from working in silos to support cultural competency and diversity. Next slide, please. Jefferson Community and Technical College was a 31 out of 34 overall and 18 out of 18. This report was a well-rounded approach to supporting an environment of inclusion, reaching URM students, and meeting the needs of the whole student. The pandemic caused many efforts to be adjusted and reevaluated. and our team appreciated that this did not stop the continued implementation of their strategies. We like the collaborative efforts with BCTC, U of L, and community partners to reach Hispanic students, and engaging parents they found was effective, and students, by using bilingual staff and student workers. When current methods did not bring about results of increasing URM faculty, it seemed like to be a good strategy to look to current URM adjunct faculty, and in some cases bringing those back, and past students. They identified areas that were a barrier to student success and addressed those providing transportation, mental health assistance, and basic needs. Many of the students, transportation was a barrier, so they started supplying TARP passes. We would suggest adding more specifics to your future plans, such as timelines. And you mentioned participation by the administration, but don't indicate how you plan to engage them. Adding detail as how you plan to incorporate their support would be helpful. Your report showed good student outcomes through your grants to African American students, and the Rise Together and the LSAMP grants. We also thought it was a great idea to provide computers to students, because we all know with moving everything online, some of the URM students were disproportionately affected by this, and they provided computers to those students. And the results showed increased time online and student success through that. Next one, please. Bluegrass Community and Technical College overall had a 31 out of 34 and the qualitative score of 16 out of 18. The implementation of strategies showed careful and thoughtful planning. Adjustments were made to address the needs of the whole student, especially in consideration of areas of difficulty that students were experiencing. One of the things that we thought was particularly effective was the implementation of video messaging due to low open rates for email. It showed creativity and customization to target their URM students. They made a good point in their lessons learned about the ability for students to see faces, body language, and feel emotions, allowing more of a connection to their students. They did a good effort in involving their administration and their HR office to confirm that each faculty and staff search committee reflected the diversity of the college, also providing training for each member in implicit bias. The review team would have liked additional detail on the effectiveness of the efforts to attract more diverse applicants. The lessons learned showed thoughtful consideration of efforts. Two suggested areas for review would be engaging students through student surveys as to the effectiveness of strategies, and more specifics about future plans to hire more diverse staff and how you might continue to involve your administration. They have a strategy called the HEART Initiative, which provides food, personal hygiene, cleaning supplies, and baby items to enhance overall student well-being for students who were experiencing difficulty through the pandemic. Faculty and staff were leading this effort, and they gave them an opportunity to engage with students. And you reported that these efforts showed an impact on retention rates, higher GPAs, and more time logged into the learning management system for those students who had received computers. That's it.
Thank you very much to you and your team. We appreciate your work. And our final group is Team 6, led by Ms. Ray Smith, and that will be Murray State University, Gateway Community and Technical College, University of Kentucky, and Elizabethtown Community and Technical College.
Thank you, Dr. Offit, and thank you for the opportunity to learn more about the DEI work at the institutions. This was my third year reading the reports, but it was my first year reading for these specific institutions. And I'd like to thank my committee members, Kim Welch, Robert Croft, and Enid Wolstein, who came in at the last minute to help us with those reports. So first we have Murray State University. look at that slide. Okay, do we,
Just state that the status is pending at the moment due to this.
okay, thank you.
That's all I'll do.
Okay, there was a miscommunication during the review process, and we're taking another look at one of the quantitative scores. The qualitative scores are done independently, and we don't even see those until the same time the institution sees them. The quantitative scores we don't see, but the qualitative scores, which my committee worked on, we're going to take another look at one of those scores. Thank you. Okay, so I'm not going to do Marie at all, right? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, okay. Okay, let me catch up with you. Okay, Gateway Community and Technical College scored 23 out of 34 on the quantitative section. They had a total of 15 out of 16, and on the qualitative scores, which my committee worked on, we scored 8 out of 18. We'll go on to the next slide, which shows that they made a strong commitment to a marketing campaign. They invested a lot of funds and their marketing staff into recruiting from local high schools. So we showed that they did that with fidelity, and they worked on it in a very aggressive manner. But we had a couple of thoughts about that it was sort of a surface level initiative rather than a strategic plan. And while you need to have diverse images in your marketing materials, you also need to back that up with action and follow through, and the work that makes the campus look the same way that the marketing materials look when someone comes to visit the campus. Also, they added requirements for some cultural diversity courses, but they added them to a couple of specific programs. And that's a good first effort, expanding into those program areas. Also, they did some DEI professional development, but to be effective, that kind of professional development needs to be required and not just offered to folks. We also showed that there was sort of, when they talked about recruitment and their partnerships, that they didn't have a lot of data to back that up, and that the reasons were based on, we didn't know whether it was based on student feedback or on data, or whether the source of the reasons for why students weren't attending their school, that was not really provided. They had some programs that they started that had sort of a low level of student participation, like they had the idea of a student ambassador, but they only had one student ambassador who consistently participated. On their final, on their lessons learned, we think they did learn some valuable lessons and that they have an opportunity for the future. They went back and evaluated what that big recruitment effort should look at and who are the students that they should be targeting. And they identified adult learners as one of the groups of students that they should target. So instead of just choosing high schools in a certain geographic area, and they're in a very high cost marketing area, but instead of just choosing those high schools, maybe taking a broader approach to what that recruitment needs to be. Okay, we'll move on to the University of Kentucky. University of Kentucky had they scored 30 out of 36 points on the quantitative scores. They had a total of 12 scores out of 12 out of 18. And on the qualitative scores, which came from my committee, we gave them an 18 out of 18. They took a very strategic approach to this initiative. They looked at DEI across the campus. So they looked at each principle of the university's strategic plan, and they said, how can we incorporate this effort into that plan? So they didn't look at departments, they looked at how they can make that a part of the university's mission. Then they looked at all the groups in the university, the faculty, the staff, the students, the community partners, and they said, how can we make them a part of this initiative? So their efforts were very comprehensive, and they provided thorough data on how they evaluated it and how they demonstrated the effectiveness of the projects, not just how they measured them, but whether they were working and being effective. And although the institutions are very different, and we know that's not a competition between institutions, this idea, this really comprehensive look at it, offers many, what we thought, sort of best practices that could be shared with other institutions. We only made one note to them, and that had to do with one of the initiatives that they had about in a classroom, and it was a note about perhaps they did measure the effectiveness of it, but they didn't really state that, and we made some suggestions about possible measurements for that. Okay, I'm ready for Elizabethtown Community and Technical College. They scored 28 out of 34. On the quantitative scores, they had 11 out of 16, and on the qualitative scores, they had 17 out of 18 from our committee. Elizabethtown, I'm ready for the next slide. Elizabethtown used really good measurable data, and they were very thorough with it. They had a strong commitment to DEI. And in his opening remarks, Travis remarked that we don't, list certain categories. And Elizabethtown chose to add a category that's unique to their area, which are folks in the military and how they could address that population. The interesting thing about Elizabethtown was when you read some of these reports or some of these institutions, they talk about their strategy and they say, oh, COVID happened. And then they say, oh, we went to a virtual recruitment meeting, but that didn't work very well. And then that's sort of the end of the sentence. But Elizabethtown, COVID happened. They went to a virtual approach and it didn't work. And then they reached down and searched really hard at what other tactics they could use to reach those students. And they ended up contacting students who contacted the institution for additional information and following up with every student who did that. And they saw some results from that. So their ability to adapt and shift tactics to achieve the goal of the institution, we thought was really impressive. So that concludes the work of Team 6, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you to your team. I'm going to stop sharing here. That concludes the reports from all of our institutions. And I wanted to give the other CEO members an opportunity to see if there are any questions that you might have, since you are hearing about the scores from institutions that you did not necessarily review. Or are there any questions or anything, any follow-up that you might have that you might want to ask any of the review team leads, or any comments that you might want to make on this part of the process?
Hi, Dr. Offit. This is Dr. Robertson. So I have a question. I noticed that many of the university and colleges during the review process, they scored very low in either the low income, well, I'll just say the low income quantitative measures. And I was just wondering, do you all plan on providing additional training or support in those areas on how institutions can evaluate and assess those measures moving forward? So that way we're accurately capturing how they're doing and progressing on those metrics. So like the low income retention, I think it was low income graduation may have been one. And I think low income degrees, I think that was the third one, if I'm remembering correctly.
So you were going in and out a little bit at the very beginning. And so would you repeat the part of that for me?
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Several of the institutions, I think,
yeah,
your institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the colleges and universities had scored fairly low, like a 0 or 1 in the low income metrics, the qualitative metric portion. And I was just wondering what the council planned on doing to provide additional training or support in evaluating and assessing those metrics moving forward to make sure that you all are accurately capturing their progress in those areas.
So in terms of the quantitative metrics, the institutions set their 5-year targets. And those targets have the baseline, as Travis said, from 2015, 2016, and they set a 5-year goal, and then there were annual incremental targets that they are trying to get to each year that we use for the assessment for the quantitative section. And so in terms of the metrics in the quantitative section, as we say, those numbers are the numbers. Either they met or exceeded their goal, they didn't meet their goal but were above the baseline, or they were below the baseline. And so that's how we take that particular number and get that quantitative score for them. And so as we look at those quantitative numbers to see where institutions lie, that's where the qualitative section comes in. And we hope to be able to say, to connect the two so that the strategies that they are talking about will kind of inform some of the information that we don't get just by looking at the number. And so what we want to do at the council is to be able to look at them to say, where are some best practices? Where are some institutions that might not be scoring low, might be scoring low, and how is it that they can use some of the strategies and that from institutions that are similar in demographics, but are doing better, so that we can kind of make that connection on a statewide level. So as far as the quantitative sections, that's how we have looked at those numbers. Going forward, institutions, as we look at our new strategic agenda, we'll be negotiating targets in terms of all of those metrics, including low income retention. And so we'll be able to say our IR at CPE and the institutional IR representatives to be able to come to a target that all of us think are fair, are achievable, and something that will make sure that we are improving the rates at that particular demographic. So that's where we are at this time with those numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, then we'll continue our meeting. Let me share my screen again. So we're going to our next steps. So what happens next? Based on the information that you saw and what you heard from Travis Powell earlier about the process, that in order to be able to request a waiver, in order to be able to be eligible automatically to apply for new academic programs, you had to meet a minimum score. And based on our information that we have at this time, you'll see the institutions that did not meet their minimum required score. However, that's not the end. They can request a waiver process, and that waiver process will allow them to speak to what they believe went wrong and how they plan on remedying that going forward. And that information will be given to each institution July 1st of 2022. So at this time, CEO members, I do not believe we had any other business. Was there any other business anyone wanted to bring to the committee meeting? Hearing none, then our next meeting is going to be on June 27th, 2022. And our next steps for this process, again, we will make sure that we follow up with getting our finalized score for Murray State University. And then we will also present this information in front of the CPE board at the June council meeting. And so if there are no other announcements or questions, then I would like to be able to call for a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
It has been moved by Dr. Robertson that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Mr. Croft. And all in favor, say aye, or we can use common consent.
Aye.
Aye.
Dr. Brown, you have a raised hand. Are you saying aye? Do you have a question?
I was saying aye.
All right, thank you very much. That means we will adjourn this meeting at 2:21 p.m. Thank you very much for your time, and you all have a great day.
Thank you.